serious TV drama podcast. I'm Scott, and with me once again, the smoke monster to my hatch inhabitant, it's Dan. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Scott. How's it hanging over there? You're not breaking yourself anymore, are you?
It was funny that I was actually speaking to my doctor today and, going over my results because I had to have a checkup with him after the hospital, sometime after the hospital visit because to make sure, I don't really know what the point is because there's nothing he can tell me. But, his basic comment was, you need to lose some weight. And then he actually acknowledged himself, like, I understand, I'm telling you that, and it was trying to lose weight is what caused this accident. It's like, well, it didn't cause the accident, but it wasn't like, oh, I'm so fat, and the bike just decided to rear up like a horse and throw me. But it was in the interest of exercise that I decided to ride the bike, and so on and so forth. I said, well, the problem, I'll start doing sit-ups when I'm able to sit up, But other than that, everything on the health front seems to be okay. How are you doing? I understand you're on vacation now, right?
Yeah, this is day one of a 9.5-day vacation. So me and my kids crossed Minnesota and went a little ways into South Dakota today. So right now they're down at in the motel pool, water slide, swimming and such. And I'm up here talking about television.
That's right. And so it's yet another time where you're recording from a motel room somewhere in the U.S. I love that image because I always picture the most basic, you've seen it in a million things motel room kind of look. Whatever. I mean, it might be very posh. I have no idea, but I'm always picturing it to being 2 degrees away from just being totally run down and shanty and whatever.
Yeah, I know. I try to stay nicer ones than that. I mean, I only stay in the ones where I can get a hooker for $10 when the kids aren't with. So this is more fun.
Oh, you're looking out for Wendy there and so.
Yeah, there's plenty of them in South Dakota and Wyoming. Red states, they breed those pretty good.
Right. Although, of course, I would assume if you're taking your kids, you are going to look for a better place. Although it would be funny just one time, just stay in the worst Motel 6 ever or something like that.
Yeah.
Here, not that they need to be scared straight, but just to be on the safe side. Like, hey, kids, check this out.
Yeah. Make sure they have a really bad night. That'd be pretty fun.
Oh, there you go. What's that in the pool? Is that cherry syrup? No. Anyway.
If the room smells too good, I'll just light a joint and drop it inside the air conditioner, and they can suffer the whole night.
That's going to smell like half the cities in the U.S. now, apparently.
Yeah, that's good.
Anyhow, we are actually back here this week. Of course, we are back to discuss the 5th, and I guess we'd call it the penultimate episode of Loki. It's funny, when I wrote my notes for this episode, I initially didn't know what the title was, and I just noticed that I still had the title in my notes as blah, blah, blah. The title, of course, if I'm remembering correctly, was Journey into Mystery. Journey into, of course. And we're going to talk.
Right, we're the first comic that Thor showed up in.
Oh, yeah. Trust me, that's on the agenda of things to talk about. And for everyone who's listening, if you stick around, you'll also... after our Loki conversation, I will be giving my views or reviews of a trifecta of HBO Max offerings. It'll be the film No Sudden Move, the dark comedy or dramedy series Hacks, and the sketch comedy show That Damn Michael Che. But we're here, the main reason that you're listening is to talk about the latest episode of Loki, so let's get to it. And as you just said, Dan, the title, of course, is the original comic that Thor, and thus his brother Loki, showed up. Until that comic was actually, I believe it was eventually got changed to just The Mighty Thor, correct?
Yeah, back in those days, these various characters would show up in other titles that have been around for a while. So I think, I don't know, I'm sure I'm right because it's just in my memory, but I think it was Journey into Mystery 83 was the first one that Thor showed up. So
that is correct. Yeah, I mean...
Same way where Ant-Man and Iron Man and stuff used to be in those, Tales to Astonish or Tales of Suspense. And it's just kind of, they were using their more, pulpy, 50s and 60s stuff to kind of, not to launch these titles. It's just kind of like what they did. But.
Right. But for major comic book history, especially for Marvel and DC, this is a common practice. I mean, many characters got their debut in what it's never like their own number one issue that comes later on. They appeared in another title, which was used as a way to facilitate that. I mean, Marvel most famously, Amazing Fantasy number 15 is the first appearance of Spider-Man, or, on the DC side, it's it's Detective Comics number 27 is the first appearance of Batman, things like that. And you can go on the list, Justice League is in Brave and Bold, and this was in this, that, so on and so forth. But,
it's like the kind of like the paper version of introducing a backdoor pilot in a TV show almost, because you can kind of maybe also pick up some of your established audience and hopefully bring them forward,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also a good way to test the waters, because then the publisher is not making as much of a financial risk. I mean, probably one of the biggest ones you have to go back to, again, I guess 1950. Ooh, was it 56? I'm going to say 56. If I'm wrong, I'm going to be ashamed of myself, but I think it was 1956 when DC first brought the Flash into being, and it was in an issue of Showcase. But that was a major thing, because that was basically DC just basically restarting the comic book universe, because for several years, the only existing superheroes, pretty much were, basically Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. Everybody else had kind of disappeared at that point. I think Martian Manhunter actually shows up as a back feature for Detective Comics, but other than that, because of those horrific congressional hearings and so on and so forth, and just sales in general, most comics were like romance and westerns and, some sci-fi stuff and whatever. Even the horror comics had disappeared at that point as well. But DC decided to restart everything with a new version of The Flash, which kicks off the Silver Age. And then obviously the classic conversation is when DC had first done spoiled what I was about to say. Justice League supposedly, and I think the story has it happening on a golf course somewhere, which I always find hard to believe because they're such hardcore New Yorkers, but whatever. And that's where Stan Lee was kind of inspired to, get together with Jack Kirby, etc., to do the Fantastic Four, which is what kicks off Marvel, the new wave of the Marvel universe, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Oh, that was a totally unexpected tangent, but hey, I love it. So.
Yeah, it is cool that, I tend to like the Marvel stuff for the most part, even though, I'll rip apart the stuff that's bad. Mm-hmm. But I do kind of appreciate this level of attention to detail. Yes. I mean, it's not, I wouldn't call it fan service. It's just kind of they know what they're talking about, and I appreciate that. They don't have to follow a linear freaking comic storyline to make me happy, but I just appreciate that. Yeah, they know what they're talking about. They're doing stuff like this.
Right. And one of the things, and we've talked about this when we talked about WandaVision, and even when we've had other comic book movie or TV show related conversations, I think when something's done well, not when something's done poorly, of course. We don't need to talk about those things. I think we always appreciate that. Okay, the people who are behind this, they know what they're doing, and they're definitely, they know their comics, but they're also trying to do something different at the same time. They're never doing straight adaptations of anything, but they are obviously using things as inspiration or taking a little bit here and a little bit there. Some of the best things are that way. That one of those things I'm going to talk about in that trifecta later actually does a lot of that, quite frankly.
And the title of the episode is, pretty much just a throwback to that, but it really did get me thinking, how much better this show is compared to the couple Thor movies.
Oh my God.
So the title of the episode just, made me just think these, on the earlier Thor adventures and stuff. And I'm sure there was more of this kind of thing than just whatever the fuck was going on in those horrible Thor movies. But
right. It is. And if I'm not mistaken, just circling back to the episode, which you just did as well. And because you mentioned the Thor movies, I feel I might as well just throw in the fact that it's not the first time Journey into Mystery has been used as an Easter egg in a Thor-related production, because I believe that appears on a billboard at some point during the first Thor movie. You see a Journey into Mystery reference, which I remember as being in the theater going, oh, that's cute. Anyway. But that, it's I love when you have characters and universes where you can throw in little Easter eggy things like that, and it doesn't really get in the way of anything. And good Lord, there are a number of Easter eggs throughout this episode. Some of them are very comic specific. Some of them might be relating to other MCU productions. A lot of them seem to be pointing, we'll just say it now, seem to be pointing to Kang the Conqueror. You know, everything from one of the buildings in the destroyed cityscape to the very creature whose name I'm probably going to mispronounce 8,000 times during this podcast. Is it Eliath?
I think so. Yeah. Well, I wasn't exactly sure, but yeah.
Yeah, we'll probably I'm just going to call it the purple haze.
Yeah, and at some point, in the last week, in between episodes, while I was thinking about it, whatever, then I realized that, like, you know, this Agent Renslayer, her first name Ravana, is some character that's tied to Kang too. I don't remember exactly how, and I didn't want to look it up, but I remember, like, you know, some connection to Kang, like a love interest, or maybe like Immortus was creeping on her or something, but I don't remember exactly who she was. But there's definitely Ravana that's like tied to like Kang and Immortus in some way. I don't want to dig into it too deeply, at least until the show is over. Even though, you know, I've read a variety of comics, but I'm pretty sure, you know, my gut impression about this is, you know, like, yeah, that some kind of connection there.
She without going too far down that rabbit hole, because we're going to go down a few during this podcast, I'm sure. You're absolutely correct. She absolutely is connected to Kang, so that would be another kind of a thing. And look, if it turns out, and it very well might, I'm sorry, I'm actually. It's odd that I'm actually become more on the fence than I was even last week. Because if it turns out that Kang is not behind all this, it's going to be, this is a deja vu moment for us. It's going to be yet another show where they kept throwing red herrings at the, you know, the more comic book, you know, centric crowd, and we're only going to come up empty there. I think the reason why one would say, oh, it can't be Kang, is because, look, from a storytelling point of view, it would be kind of weird to suddenly identify Kang as the villain in the final episode, when up till this point, there's been no acknowledgement of his existence beyond these Easter egg style clues. So, so that's kind of problematic, you know, because it reminds us of when we kept saying, how many times did we say Mephisto and all the other different possible villains during WandaVision? And it turned out to be none of them. But
yeah, they could be like, using it, maybe Immortus, and have that be like the entry point to Kang or something.
Yeah. The way I'm kind of thinking about it, maybe it's a compromise. I don't know. We did realize, especially, I mean, we kind of knew that she was going to be appearing in the Doctor Strange movie to begin with. I'm referring to WandaVision and Wanda Maximoff now. So there definitely was a direct connection between WandaVision and that upcoming Doctor Strange film. And everything is pointing to, and from what I've heard, that all the speculation we had about who the big bad was going to be in WandaVision, that's really going to be who the big bad's really going to probably end up being in the Doctor Strange movie. And that's where we're really going, which kind of makes sense. So in a way, I think, I'm speculating here, but it seems to make sense when I say it out loud, I think that could be what they might be doing here. Because, although many of us believe Kang is the big bad, it is confirmed, absolutely confirmed, he is going to be the villain in the upcoming Ant-Man movie.
Right. Yeah, they've got casting done and whatever, and they announced it pretty early on.
It's it's the actor whose name I don't even want to. It's Jonathan something Davis, I think is his name. I probably got that wrong. He was the main character from Lovecraft Country. The Ant-Man movie is most likely, again, I don't know, haven't heard anything about the script or anything, but one can assume or guess it's going to again really deal a lot with the quantum realm. And there's a very strong theory out there. I'm not saying it hasn't been confirmed, but it's a very strong theory that all of this TVA business that we're seeing and where they are and everything actually is taking place within the quantum realm.
Yeah, I think we talked about that briefly.
I think you did. I think so. So, which therefore kind of, ergo, this series might have actually more ties to that Ant-Man movie than Doctor Strange or Spider-Man or whatever upcoming MCU project. So just like WandaVision was kind of setting the stage for whoever the big bad is in the Doctor Strange movie, maybe this is more setting the stage for Kang for the Ant-Man movie without him really being in this. Again, 10 minutes into the next episode, we might just see him. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm excited because it'll work for me either way. But I am intrigued about it. So we'll see.
Yeah, and it would be kind of cool, just like thematically similar if they use Ramatut or Immortus, because they're like a different age version of Kang, and then you've got this Loki thing where you have different age versions of Loki that are being played quite effectively. So if they do something like that, I think it would be just kind of a nice little thing.
I definitely agree with that, and one of my mantras throughout this episode is going to be, whatever they do, I'd like to say need, but no, I want them to stick the landing on this one. Because they have not done a good job with that more often than not with a lot of the MCU stuff. Especially, I think we agree. I know we have friends or whatever who were about the first couple episodes of WandaVision. I'm not one of those people, but I understand that.
We don't call them friends anymore.
Well,
we've had nothing.
Some of them some of the people actually like. Some of them I don't.
Yeah.
But at least I know what they were. But there's something very inventive and risk taking with those episodes. The final episode, as we talked about, a few months back, it's like, it felt like you just kind of fell back into the typical third act of every MCU thing ever. Minus a few. I mean, there were some really cool things that happened in the episode, but overall, it's like, it was so much better until we got to this episode. I just don't.
Right, and it's just I'm not a big fan of that kind of thing in most stuff. Like Wonder Woman, for example. I really like most of the movie, but the big battle at the end, I'm just tired of like big battles where like people are running into each other, the camera's too close, and you can't see what's going on and stuff. And they do that in a lot of this stuff. Yeah. So in a way where it'll take something good where it didn't really hurt Wonder Woman for me, but I could have done without it.
It's to me. I know. I totally agree, and I really like we're switching universes, but it doesn't matter because it's still in the same kind of genre. I like so much of the Wonder Woman movie. I definitely like the movie overall, but that for me is the worst part of that movie. Is the big third act climactic blah blah blah. Because I'm going, it was so much better until he did this. This just felt kind of just your typical generic, look, bolts of mystical lightning, whatever, blah blah blah. Anyway,
and I haven't liked it in a lot of the stuff. I mean, even Iron Man 1. I mean, I'd rather see Jeff Bridges, being schmarmy and like delivering pizza than like getting in a suit and just like everything's blowing up.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so back to the episode, and like I said, as far as Easter eggs, there'll be a few that I'm going to mention. Absolutely, we'll get there when we get there. I kind of still want to go through the episode in a somewhat chronological fashion because, it's one way to not miss certain details. One of the things something I hadn't heard mentioned, and again, it's just a little tiny art design detail, if anything. It's not an Easter egg or anything. I like the opening of the episode. I love the fact they do this kind of a corkscrew camera movement. I kind of enjoyed it's needless, but I enjoyed it anyway.
Yeah.
But the fact is, and this is a little thing, it's zooming in onto those elevator doors, which we know leads to where the timekeepers were supposedly going to be, whatever. But I noticed, what's interesting? The design on the elevator doors, it looks like hourglasses. Hadn't noticed that before. I just it's little things like that. I'm like, is this the way to go to Our Man's house? And I say, oh wait, wrong universe. Anyway. So we obviously we do pick back up in this, what looks to be when you first see it, it looks like a post-apocalyptic New York City, and where they are, it's almost like that must be like Central Park or something like that. And when he's encountering when Loki is encountering the Loki variants, and that's where we start to we get the little bits of information that we need, like what the deal is with that big cloud creature, Goliath. I had to tell myself that wasn't the dragon Fing Fang Foom.
Yeah.
For a second there, I thought that, and I said, "No, wait a minute. I think there's rumors that character might actually be appearing in the Shang-Chi film? Based
That would
on."
be cool.
I think there's something that in the trailer really briefly that made people go, "Ooh, that would make sense," and that might be just one more reason to actually check out that movie. The trailers are good. I'll see it. I'll see it.
I've been watching Kim's Convenience, and one of the guys from that show plays Shang-Chi, which I didn't realize until the last trailer.
Oh, yeah.
So it just because the first trailer was kind of muddled, but now it's like, oh, it's definitely him, and he's pretty funny on the show. So that kind of, I like him on the sitcom, but the fact that he's like good at humor makes me think just like, oh, maybe it'll be fun, kind of like some of the Marvel stuff can be if executed properly. So
Right.
he's got good timing and shit.
Okay. Oh, that's actually encouraging to hear. Cool. We have that. We come back to that scene where we pick up again with Ravonna and Sylvie, and it's basically and I'm probably not pronouncing her name. Renslayer is her last name, which maybe I should call her Renslayer instead of Ravonna.
Yeah.
Every time I say Ravonna, I feel like I should be saying Ramona. Then I feel like I'm talking about a Beverly Cleary book or something. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about right now. So Renslayer is trying to win Sylvie's trust here. And, you're watching her and I can't help but thinking right from the get-go, should you believe a character who has been shown to be a liar throughout the first 4 episodes? And now, and it's ironic she's acting like she's upset because she was lied to. Obviously that's my thinking at that moment. And I think everyone's thinking that, and we were all proven right, about, 10 minutes later. But we kind of bounce back to the Void, because I really want to talk about the Void. And that's the fun stuff in this episode. And we're told that this area, it's the Void, it's essentially the dumping ground for all the pruned branches of the timeline, which would therefore mean all the troublesome variants have all been zapped here. Let's just get it out of the way now, even though we're going to be talking about him throughout the episode. One of my favorite things about this entire episode, and there's a few things to point out that are like amazing. But much like remember how excited I was when we were talking about that little mid-credit scene last week when I realized, oh, that's Richard E. Grant as it looks like the classic Loki. He did not disappoint.
Oh man, he's so fucking good.
Oh, I mean, he's every moment with him. I kept going, and then what ends up happening to him, I was like, genuinely upset me. I mean, it worked beautifully for the episode, but no, because I want to have more with him. Could he get his own little spin-off? Could he just get some webisodes somewhere? I want more. Yeah. I want more.
I mean, the arc that character had in no time was amazing. So,
to be that effective, and then also to affect the audience, because I'm sure I'm not the only one who actually got genuinely sad at what eventually happens to him, all within the course of one episode. And again, it's a comic book show. Really tells you something. That's an impressive piece of work there. I'm right now, because at this point in the episode, they're kind of bouncing back a little bit back and forth between the TVA and the Void. So that's kind of what I'm doing as well, just so I don't lose you here. There was something interesting, because we do bounce back to Renslayer and Sylvie, and something when she's actually talking about the fact that the people who were pruned aren't actually killed, because she's actually applying a very basic scientific fact to her explanation that you cannot destroy matter. So people or things, they're not being reset, quote unquote. They're being transferred somewhere, and which is the Void. The only thing is, no one ever returns from the Void. Which sounds right because it's called the Void. And one of the things I really love about the episode, because I'm not going to call it genius, but I'm going to say it's very smart. You came up with a concept and this whole idea of the Void, and we make it clear it's this, like I said, it's like this dumping ground for everything they decide to zap out of existence or reality or alternate reality, whatever, which also means, oh, You know what's going to be a dumping ground for? It's going to be a dumping ground for those Easter eggs we were just talking about. So it's going to be like those collector scenes that were in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies or Infinity War, where you're just looking at if you're watching at home, you're pausing like, oh, there is that, oh, there's that, oh, hey, is that Howard the Duck? That kind of thing. So since I'm bouncing back to the void, let's just get it out of the way. Let me mention the one, and I'm probably the millionth person now to talk about it. I don't care. It's the most beautifully ridiculous Easter egg I can think of. The Thanos copter. It's unbelievable. When there's a lot of times where they're panning over the landscape, or whatever, of the void, and that's where you're going to be spotting certain things. But at one point early on, you see the wreckage of this yellow helicopter that's got the name Thanos ablazing across its side. Now, just for anyone who doesn't know this, and there might be a lot of people who don't, that's not just some needless, silly reference to the Mad Titan Thanos. No. And this goes back to my childhood. That's actually taken from a comic Marvel had back in the 70s called Spidey Super Stories, which was a comic geared for younger children because it was based on how Spider-Man appeared on a children's educational series, The Electric Company. Of course, I watched The Electric Company. I remember getting annoyed with Spidey, but I even remember the song for that. I won't do it, but I remember it. Anyway, in one story, I think it featured Spider-Man and Hellcat, actually. I'm surprised they even would have a character with Hell in the name in a kid's comic, but whatever. Thanos does appear, and he is literally flying a helicopter around New York that has his name on the side. For anyone who even remotely, even if you haven't seen, even if you were someone who had or hadn't seen the movies, the idea of Thanos riding a helicopter, and of course he's huge, so he looks even more ridiculous. He's like, "What's next? Darkseid on a pogo stick?" It makes no sense. And now when I'm looking at it, and I was like, going, "Oh, Thanos beat Trump by like several decades because Trump has his name on his helicopters." Anyway, and just to knock off a few easy ones, throughout the episode of that landscape I'm referring to, you will see things like, I know you noticed this one, piece of a statue which is clearly the Living Tribunal. That was pretty awesome. Again, that's an Easter egg just for comic book people. In a sentence, basically, the Living Tribunal is like a cosmic entity that kind of oversaw and thus judged the entire Marvel multiverse, quite frankly. So I love the fact there's a little reference there. It really seems appropriate considering what the TVA does.
Right.
But then some of the things you see are like, I know you see Yellow Jacket's helmet there. So I don't know if that's specifically the one that's from Ant-Man or an alternate version. I'm going to go alternate version, not the one from Ant-Man.
Not Corey Stoll.
Yeah, not Corey. You also see the remains of Ronan the Accuser's ship from the Guardians of the Galaxy. And the one that's kind of the most, of these, the one I think is the most fun one, once again, it's not the first time I've seen a movie where, oh, look, there's a SHIELD helicarrier. But the difference with this one, and it makes you curious about what reality this is from, I'm pretty sure there's a Hydra logo on that helicarrier. So I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Anyway, so let's get back to the void as far as those Loki variants, because, we started talking about the classic one. But it's interesting. Initially, when... before they get to the hatch and everything, they're treating Kid Loki seems to be initially in charge. Although once we get to past a certain point in the episode, that doesn't really feel like it's the case anymore, but they still seem to be more deferring to him. And I like the idea that I think we find out what may very well be the reason is that in his reality, the actual Nexus event he caused was killing Thor. So I was like, ooh, okay. I'm almost curious to hear more about that. Was Thor also your age when you killed him? I'm just curious. Did you kill him in the crib? I'm just curious. Speaking of that hatch, when we passed through, I love the camera angle when we were passing through the ground to get to the interior of the hatch, and you knew right off the bat, oh, they're going to stick something in here. And this will probably be one of the last Easter egg things I'll mention for the episode, until maybe at the end. You do see a couple more. One is very obvious. You see Thor's hammer, which is like, oh, that's nice. But more interesting, not so far from it, trapped in a jar. You see, well, I know there's two possible versions of this, but basically, let's just say it's Throg, which is Thor as a frog.
That's so funny.
I was like, wow, did they decide, okay, if Shazam could have, look closely, there's Mr. Mind, which is, a little, brainiac caterpillar. Okay, we're going to have the Thor as a frog in our movie, in our show. And one of the things, cause I actually rewatched a lot of this episode for different scenes. And when I was looking closely at that, I realized, oh, what's interesting is not just that the frog is trapped, Thor, the frog or Throg is trapped in a jar. As I understand it, he would have all of the Thunder God's power once he touches the hammer. And the hammer is so close, but so far away because he's in the jar. So it's like an almost hellish existence, other than the fact, well, you're trapped in a jar, you probably should be dead. But you're so close, but you can't quite reach what would make you, zap out of there. I thought that was kind of a neat little thing they stuck in there. So when we're hanging out with the variants in the Loki hatch, and you know what, I am not going to get into what all the different video games are and they're from different things in real history. I don't care about that. I care more about classic Loki. The story he tells about himself, and this was what we were talking about earlier as far as Richard E. Grant's performance. I think this was the first big thing that made me go, wow. It just had, I guess I wasn't expecting like this unexpected, poignant story from him,
Yeah.
And he's aware. I mean, it actually does involve Thanos because he basically just wanted to get away from all that, and how he goes to live on a little planet by himself, and how he missed his brother, and then the one moment when he starts to make a move to leave his little, I guess, his self-imposed exile, that's when the TVA kind of jumped in and snatched him. I mean, it's bizarrely sad, I thought,
Yeah, it's really sad, and it's also, like, relevant to, like, where this Loki is and, like, his, like, development as he, like, learns from his, like, what he shouldn't do, or, from the stuff that he would do in the future. It's, it's relevant on multiple levels, but right. but it totally holds up on its own, too.
Yeah, exactly. It obviously, number one, it works perfectly on its own as a great, you just gave me an amazing backstory for this character, and it took you maybe like 90 seconds to do that. Kudos again. That I always say, sometimes they say in writing or screenwriting or tele whatever you want to call it, show don't tell, but sometimes telling can be more interesting. And here he's able to tell a whole thing. I don't need a flashback. I don't need you to show me little bits and pieces. I got it through the actor. And yet what you just said, right, because there are parallels and echoes of what's going on with we'll call him our Loki, from him, the fact that Loki himself just, not that long ago, just learned about what his ultimate fate was going to be at the hands of Thanos. And now he gets to hear from this character who basically had, didn't choose to go in that direction, chose this other path instead. And look what happened to him. And also the fact that he went to go and hang out on this little planet all by himself, which then underscores the thing that Loki had been told, now at this point a few times in this series, about him being alone. That seems to be, a constant theme about, Loki is someone who doesn't have friends, and he's always been alone, always will be alone, all that kind of stuff, which is probably what's making his relationship with Sylvie, or the female Loki, if we want to call her that, that much more interesting. And I think a lot of it is around that, I guess.
Yeah.
Just again, I guess I will throw in one more thing, even though I'm sure he'll mention it because I'm assuming he's covering this on some vidcast or podcast or something. Did everyone else out there notice that Kid Loki is actually drinking a high C ecto cooler? I was going to say, I bet our mutual friend Jay Glatfelter did not miss that. I'm sure that's probably his favorite thing in the whole thing. All right, so we bounce back to the TVA, and I think this is the part where could be my first curse word of the podcast because she deserves it. Once again, Renslayer is proven to be a piece of shit. she just is. That's what she is. And then in the next unexpected, or should we have? I guess we should have expected it. Sylvie decides to prune herself, and that sounded really weird as I said that out loud. It's not that kind of a podcast, not that kind of a show. But but when when we bounce back to the what's going on in the hatch, it's that little moment where Loki tries to rev them all up, to call to arms. His Loki's sudden heroic bravado. I love. There's that moment. It's like, oh, it's beautiful. It's pure beautiful comedy when they all just bust out laughing. And I switch over to Richard E. Grant's performance. I actually made the note of, man, Grant seems to be delighting in how to use that cape. when he flings it up and sits back down with it and it bunches up, I was getting such a kick out of it. And I think it's at that point in the episode where Loki's going to go, off on his own, and when he goes up the hatch, and that's when we finally get to meet, I guess we'll call him President Loki. And I am aware that this is something that was also done in the comics. Not, I guess, 7 years ago. I think there was a limited storyline that had like a President Loki kind of a thing going on, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, but they've been. I think they showed that in an ad or the very first teaser for the show. One of the shots was him with the Vote Loki thing, and we've been waiting to when is this going to show up? I keep wanting to use it for a picture when I put up the Facebook threads, and I keep like, oh, it might not be in this episode. I took a chance this week and turned out to be right. But before we can find out anything about this President Loki, we see that Sylvie has transported to the void. And she's trying to escape, that big purple haze or the Goliath or the 21st century, I guess that was the 21st century back then too. The MCU version of the smoke monster. Because you can't get, if you're a Lost fan, you can't get away from the fact like, oh, that's kind of reminding me of the smoke monster. And they're also in a hatch. It's almost, it feels like it's almost deliberate, which is fine by me. It's like, take a little bit of this, a little bit of that. She gets saved by Mobius, who's driving, he's driving a pizza delivery car. Okay. I kept thinking about that. I don't know why I focused on that for a little while. I kept thinking, is there anything special about that car? I know there's something, I think I read somewhere the license plate's actually a reference to one of the Thor writers, but that's not it. It's like, but why a pizza delivery car? I realized, no, there's no reason. It's just ludicrous. WandaVision had to do a thing with an ice cream truck, so naturally, Loki has to do a thing with a pizza delivery car.
Oh, that's so funny.
So we switch back to what's going on in the hatch. So it's President Loki and his, I don't know what to call them. I'll call his, since he's political, I'll call him his cronies. It becomes a fight scene. I'm sorry. and I'm not criticizing it at all. It's the most silly, ludicrous fight scene I've seen in some time, which I enjoyed it so much. Again, I think we were talking once about, it's not like Loki is really known for, their fighting skills, although they can fight. But if you go back and you watch that scene, I swear I almost needed to see like bang, boom, splats on the screen, like from a Batman episode.
Oh yeah, Well, yeah, they're all just like fighting like they really don't want to get hit. It's that kind of fight, and it's funny.
Oh,
But I laughed out loud when when alligator Loki chewed off his arm.
when alligator Loki does, yeah, when he bites off, I guess his hand or whatever, I was like, oh my god, they just went Monty Python on us. I love this, and I love the scream. I love this. So, like, they could have went more graphic, and just had like just gush, a
Yeah,
geyser of blood or anything. But I just said, oh, I just love that.
yeah, and the fact that alligator Loki was like hanging out in a kiddie pool. It's just like it's just goofy but fun.
I love how much conversation is inspired by alligator Loki throughout the episode. It's very interesting because it's the one thing's like, oh, we can't really tie this to anything. It's like, wait, how do we know? I think there's a later conversation. It might have been when Mobius is talking to the variants. I think it's there. I'm not sure, or maybe it happened already. I'm forgetting. Just the fact that they don't actually know if he's a Loki or not, because he could be, be lying. Even though I keep wondering, wait, how is he communicating with them? Lokis aren't telepathic. How is that happening? But I think it is the Mobius conversation because he could be lying. But then again, it would be like a Loki to lie. So then maybe he is a Loki. It's like Loki logic. It's like, I lie, therefore I am Loki. I don't know. So at this point, the remaining Loki variants, and I say that because the boastful Loki was probably the least interesting of the Lokis, to be honest, even though I was very curious about that hammer of his. He's proven to be a traitor. He was kind of working in conjunction with President Loki. So Loki and the other variants get out of the hatch and they're on their way. And I think we do get another interesting little bit of conversation here, which really says a lot without saying too much. It's when classic Loki basically says he believes that all Lokis are forever broken. And on top of that, Kid Loki exclaims, that whenever a Loki does try to fix himself or herself or themselves, whatever, that Loki is hunted and pruned by the TVA. But despite the fact that this is what they believe, they nonetheless agree to help our Loki and go along with his belief that this female variant is the key to toppling the TVA and perhaps maybe course correcting everything. Who knows? It's just really kind of, I liked it because it made sense as far as their motivations. Like, okay, we're going to do this. At least we'll do it up to a point because,
Right.
of what because one of the hard things to do sometimes when you're writing a story and especially when you acquire allies is, okay, give me a reason why they want to help. Because sometimes, that's like, I don't buy that. It needs to be stronger. And I felt the case that Loki made and what they had witnessed and what's been going on. Like, okay, I can believe that they want to help him at this point. At least they want to help him up to a certain point. They're not going to go past that, which is exactly what they do. Even though really classic Loki actually does go above and beyond which is his way of changing. The unexpected moment that I really enjoyed in the episode, and it shouldn't have been unexpected because I've been really enjoying her performance, and we've already talked about how much we like Owen Wilson. By the way, right now, this might be my favorite thing Owen Wilson's done. I might like him more in this than maybe even the Wes Anderson things, or it's like neck and neck maybe.
Yeah.
The little conversation he has with Sylvie in the car. Especially the fact that they both have their mutual, annihilating riddled pasts, and how I think there's that little bit where Mobius, he had felt that the ends justified the means, and that was his way to believe that the TVA were the good guys. And by the way, just for everybody who's trying to reset their moral compass out there, the ends justify the means is never a really good reason for good. It's typically a rationalization and an excuse for being bad. So that's just, case in point, Jimmy McGill. But it's during that little car ride. I kept thinking there should have been like a pizza in there. Anyway, Sylvie is convinced, although I guess it would be like really old and moldy, whatever. Sylvie is convinced that they need to turn back towards that, the angry cloud, I think is what Mobius refers to it as. But she's convinced they need to turn around, basically for answers and a way out. And, at this point, what has he got to lose? Of course, he's going to go along with that decision. So we, in the course of all this, I think it's roughly around this point in the episode, we get something. I don't know if I guess it's an Easter egg, but it's not a Marvel-centric Easter egg. It's just kind of a more, it's an explicit podcast because I hate saying WTF. It's a what the fuck?
Yeah, it definitely appeals to my X-Files.
It's a very X-Files like thing for them to do, because basically a World War II battleship is dropped into the void. While we see the purple smoke monster is decimating the crew. What's really notable is that battleship. It's as I think you see it on the side. It's the USS Eldridge.
Yes.
And yeah. I mean, do you want to fill in what the USS Eldridge is, Dan?
Yeah, it's a destroyer, not a battleship. It's much smaller than that, for what it's worth. But it's a ship that was used in the the Philadelphia experiment, the noted mystery thing where the ship allegedly teleported, disappeared.
Right. Oh, by the way, the fact that you corrected me saying battleship and destroyer, you remind me when you go with someone who's is big on sailing, and you refer to a ship as a boat or vice versa, and they have to correct you, and it's like, oh, shut up. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Exactly. It was alleged. It's kind of like it was rendered invisible during an experiment by the U.S. Navy. And I bet a few of our listeners have probably seen a certain sci-fi movie that was done around that event, some years ago, called the Philadelphia Experiment. It's just funny that they decided to pop that one in here.
Well, yeah, and it really doesn't make, any particular sense, because, I mean, that ship, the ship came back in reality, not like that the crew got wiped out, but just the fact that they decided to use that as something that just randomly disappeared. I mean, the logic doesn't make any sense, but it's just ridiculous. And I really like.
How I think it made sense, because I think it was from a different reality where it actually did disappear, and there's no, that's not what happened. So we're gonna drop it here because that's not supposed to be what happened. Whatever. Why is there a Thanos copter?
Right. After this, I thought it'd be cool if the Mary Celeste showed up, their crew got wiped out, and then the ship disappears or something, or it'd be really funny if that's what Loki used to escape the void or something.
Oh, at this point, I was half expecting the Black Rock to appear.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the way it's going. So yeah, this is the fact that they did that. It was just, I don't know why they did it, but it's pretty awesome.
And I got a little confused. I mean, unless maybe for some reason it's a shot that is going to appear in the next movie. I mean, movie. That actually shows you how I'm really enjoying this, because I'm referring to an episode as a movie. When I was watching the trailer or preview, whatever you want to call it, for this episode, a couple days earlier, because I was trying to find an image to use for the for the podcast and the thread, whatever, there was a shot of Loki on the destroyer, zapping bolts and whatever, which obviously didn't happen in the episode. So I'm going, okay, either that's something that happens in the next episode, even though it seems like they've kind of passed the ship, or that was something that they shot and they just decided to cut. So either way, interesting, or at least interesting to me. Okay. So at this point, up over the horizon, we see I'll call it the pizza wagon appears, and then we get the nice little reunion between, the different characters with Sylvie and Loki, and of course, Mobius and whatever. Of course, Sylvie has to mock Loki's rather simplistic plan, because, naturally. But she has figured out, at least she is surmising, I shouldn't say she figured out, 'cause she could be wrong, but she is surmising that Goliath, aka the Purple Haze, is just some big guard dog, that it is protecting whomever is behind, pretty much everything. which would probably be just past the void at the, I'll put it in air quotations, at the end of time. Plausible theory. That's obviously what we're going to be going with. But before we can get more into that, we got to go bounce back to the TVA, and we see that Renslayer goes to visit Hunter B-15. I hope I got her letter and numbers designation correct here.
Yeah, that's right.
She's apparently, all this time, she's being held prisoner. Am I the only one who thought it felt a little redundant that Renslayer was asking her about Sylvie, about what her motivation was, because, figure she would know from the link. I'm like, didn't she kind of tell you all this already? Don't you kind of know all this already?
Yeah, it was kind of a weird scene.
Yeah, I mean, I liked having a moment with that character again, and also these two kind of facing off, because obviously they were closely, allied before, and now obviously they're not. But I kept thinking, I wish you gave me a better reason. Or she could have said she wanted to get more insight or something about her, but the way she phrased it, I was like, well, you know that. She told you like 20 minutes ago, but whatever.
Right. Yeah, I suppose I just used it as, like just another scene to like make Renslayer like less likable, but it really wasn't necessary at this point. I mean, there really hasn't after the last couple episodes. I mean, none of us are really like, looking to like Thanos, where like we can sort of understand the motivations. We're just kind of like, this isn't a character that has a lot of elements of good at this point, which is kind of nice to have every now and then too. You can't always have a sympathetic villain.
I feel at the end of the day, the reason you have the scene, and I get it, again, writer perspective, is even if, okay, how do I put this? Okay, what the, I don't want to say MacGuffin because that's not the correct usage. The pretense, that's what I want to say. The pretense of what the scene is about is kind of bullshit. But what we get out of when we drill down to a specific moment in the scene, I was going, oh, that's why you wanted this scene here. That's why you wanted this. You just needed a reason to because you want this specific exchange to happen. We just need a reason for, to get to it. And the reason is, it's also made clear that, Renslayer wants to find out who's behind everything. And even though her reason clearly isn't the same as Sylvia's, but as Hunter B-15 says to her, and as any writing teacher will confirm, when it comes to a character's motivation, a need is always stronger than a want. And I think this whole scene boils down to Hunter B-15 says, well, Sylvie's going to beat you to the punch here, be able to do this, because she needs to do this. You just want to do this. And the need is always right. And I was like, and then when that happened, I was like, okay, that's why. That's because that's the only reason for that scene. Otherwise,
yeah, it's because of the way that the different characters in the show. Like Hunter B-15 is really the only character that she could be talking to. So for us to see what's going on, I mean,
exactly, right. Because you haven't really given us much. You're going to talk to the guy who doesn't know what a fish is. The little guy with who's checks in security. No. Anyway, when we switch back to the void, we do get I love, and one of the things I love about this episode, and there's a lot to love in this episode, an episode that has so many really big things happening still makes time for all these lovely little moments, and some of which we've talked about already, and this one we've talked about a little bit. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, or just to bring it up because now is when it happens. The moment between Mobius and I guess we'll call it 3 because the alligator is there. The 3 Loki variants, and I think we already talked about it a bit because of speculating on alligator Loki here. That to me is also one of the best scenes in the entire thing, because there's that moment, because that's the moment that leads to what classic Loki does later.
Right.
Because it's in there where Mobius talks about what he wants to do as a result of all this. And he says the thing about, a person, no matter how late it is in their life or whatever, that a person can change. And that, obviously, from what we just heard earlier, runs contradictory to classic Loki's thinking, but you can see him taking that in and considering it. And that's what, and if, it's one of those things where maybe therefore we should have expected what happened at the end, but how could we expect that? Because it was just, wow.
Yeah. Well,
But again, lauding what Grant does with that character, with limited time for that performance. So many nice little moments there. It's like, oh, that's very interesting. I really like the fact that they, you can see it. So he's playing the drama part, he's playing the comedy part. So good. Guest. I mean, I don't know if a show like this will be recognized, but it's like how the Emmys has that guest actor in a whatever limited series, whatever. That's what I would. There you go.
Outstanding guest actor in a limited series.
Right, exactly. Although one could make the case that in his own, I guess one could say in his experience, in his own life story that we heard earlier, he tried to make a change when he chose to leave and go hang out on a planet by himself. And look what ended up, happening with that, because obviously going off to live, a solitary existence is a kind of a major change for, a god of mischief, or as he puts it, god of outcasts. I really love that, which is like, oh, that's perfect. They're totally the god of outcasts at this point. But speaking of nice moments, while that's going on, then we get another Loki and Sylvie thing. I enjoyed the little comic denial of that moment they had in that previous episode, which apparently caused the Nexus event. I'm just really enjoying the way these two actors are interacting with each other. And I kind of like that there's something there, but there's no way either one of them are going to push it to that point, which, on one hand might be kind of cool, on another hand might go, ew. So I'm glad they don't have to do that. Instead, they kind of fill in the blanks with the business about the blanket. I like that. Oh, by the way, I love that I think she mentioned something about, well, you could conjure me up a different outfit. This is kind of uncomfortable. And part of me was like, oh, yeah, why doesn't he do that? Part of me was like, well, why don't you give her like the classic, enchantress outfit or something? But instead, no, I'll just make the blanket a little bit bigger.
And then she complains about it. I like how the show doesn't forget that these are both Lokis, so they still have time to snipe at each other.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. What is this, a tablecloth? I thought that was really great. But, it does come down to the fact that these two, they're definitely in this together. And through his experiences with the TVA, it's interesting because, again, one of the themes, actually, of this episode is about how a person can or be willing to change. And he says himself that he has changed. So it's almost monumental when a character acknowledges it themselves rather than it just being, apparent to others, whatever. So that kind of works. I thought it was a little interesting that it turned, and it was one of those things I went, I'm gonna go along with this. I don't know if that's really how it's supposed to work. I guess she had it on her person. Maybe Renslayer still had hers. Maybe it was the one from before. I don't know. Somehow Sylvie has a temp pad. I can't remember where she got it. I mean, I don't know where she snatched it from. I'm probably just forgetting. But apparently, even though she purged herself, pruned herself, which actually purged, that works too. She had it on her person, so she has it there in the void, which means, hey, look, someone thought to bring a temp pad here, and they have a way to get out of the void, which apparently no one's ever been able to escape from until now. I'm fine with that. It's fine. I just remember thinking, oh, that's convenient. Okay, I'll go along with it. It's fine. So, but also it gets us to do a little bit of house cleaning here, because now we have that moment in the episode. Okay, Mobius is going to go use that to go back to the TVA. But the Loki variants decide to remain in the void. Interesting decision. I guess what they were saying at that point was they're used to their existence there, and so they'll be fine just staying there. Okay. All right, I'll go. Whatever. To each.
They're setting up the possibility of a alligator, Loki, frog, Thor team up in the future.
Oh man! Oh, it's like that story with the frog and that's a name. Oh, it's a snake. Anyway. And of course, and Loki and Sylvie are going to prepare to take on, Alliance so she can enchant it. Okay, I got all that. I love when Loki, I love Loki being the one who decides to do the hug, which is kind of like, oh man, he really has changed, instead of just shaking his hand. But come on, Mobius mouthing, "You're my favorite" to her. It's so ridiculous. It's like, oh, that's just perfect. That's just, man, right there I was like, okay, man, all the mean things I've said about Owen Wilson, I gotta all erase them all. Oh my God. It's like having a Christian Slater-like moment for me where I hated him for so long and I was like, oh, okay, now I like him because of Mr. Robot. So, in the episode, we're at the point where Loki is trying to be a distraction to Alliance while Sylvie is working her enchantment. But I guess him running around waving that flamey sword that he got from Kid Loki, doesn't really do very much. And I was like, oh, what is this, a leftover prop from Game of Thrones or something? But that's when classic Loki. Oh, by the way, I love the fact that I think he's even referred to in the closed captioning as classic Loki. And if he's not, he should be, because I just love it. It's classic Loki. Classic Loki conjures up, I guess you'd call it, an entire Asgardian cityscape.
Yeah, that's it's pretty awesome.
Well, one of the cool things is it's one of the only times, because now it's 5 out of the 6 episodes. Number one, it's one of the few times that we get to really see the real power capabilities of a Loki. Because that's pretty tremendous what he's doing. And we get that little bit when Sylvie and Loki were trapped on Lamentus, when it was falling down all around him, and he did that one thing where he kept that gigantic thing from falling on him. And you can speak to this better than I can. But in that moment, I was going, yeah, if you think about it, because I remember I had liked Loki from I didn't read a ton of Thor comics, but I did read Thor mostly in the 70s and early 80s and comics from that era and some Silver Age ones as well. And not only was Loki always one of my favorite villains, he was definitely in my top 5, top 6, whatever. But Loki was pretty freaking powerful.
Yeah.
And they've never really shown him to be like super duper powerful in these movies.
No.
It's more like there's a lot of trickery. He can, appear and disappear places and again, playing up the whole God of Mischief thing. But it's like, no, but he actually wields a lot of power. And I like the idea that, well, just look what freaking classic Loki is doing.
The fact that they noticed it is probably significant, for something in the future, I suppose, or it's just cool. But the fact that they realize that they have more potential is, it's just interesting, and just another layer to like a really effective scene.
Right. It was just amazing, and of course, him doing that does work as a major distraction. While Loki and Sylvie are combining their energies and wills to enchant, the big smoky dragon, and that's. Of course, before that can happen, unfortunately, classic Loki is pretty much erased from existence after. I love him finding his glorious purpose.
Yeah, and I kind of see it in the way that, like, he was homesick and he knew it was a suicide mission, so he just decided he wanted to go out in Asgard, even if he manifested it on his own. Like, that's the way I kind of like,
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, great observation. Absolutely, makes perfect sense. And and again, it was just it was a great coda for a character I wish we'd gotten to spend more time with, but it was just definitely a major reason why again, much like we said last week, I'm going to say this week, this is my favorite episode of the show so far. I love the fact that each episode is building on the previous one, and as you were pointing out, obviously the first couple were about setting all this up, and now things have been getting paid off, and yet they're being able to do that while still taking the time for just really nice character development, as well as because obviously the plotting can be insane or convoluted here, and yet we're still able to, generally speaking, pretty much follow it. So they're really doing a nice job of it.
Yeah. It's not just like world building and stuff. They're actually like making good stuff, and like the world building is almost like secondary. It's there and it's well done, but it's not super noticeable if you're not looking for it, I guess.
Right. So they're trying to enchant, the purple haze, and then obviously they eventually do, because the purple haze just all of a sudden goes all green. So that means, obviously Hal Jordan is here to sit. No, it doesn't mean that. It means the enchantment worked. And then it's the end of the episode because, the now green clouds part to reveal what lies beyond. We see something, a structure, a location in the distance. And if Sylvia's right, maybe we're finally going to learn who's behind the TVA. And of course, the speculation, which swings us back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the conversation about this episode, is that Chronopolis on the horizon, which is where Kang the Conqueror, basically likes to sit around hanging out, whatever. Or is it something else? I kind of think that's what it is, but, could it be another Loki? I think we had talked about that a lot, because since everything else seems to be about Loki-centric, but what other Loki would there be, and how would that one be depicted? I have no idea. A Godzilla version of Loki? I have no idea. So, of course, and the dumbest thought I had, and this will be, I was like, are they going to walk all the way there, man? It just seemed far. And, they already did all that walking on Lamentus. It just seems, that's a lot of walking.
It'd be cool if they drove the pizza delivery car.
Oh, that would make, it would make more sense to me, because I'm thinking, hey, your gods, especially, our Loki, you probably haven't walked around very much in your life. Anyway.
And if they took the car, then, they could do something where, like, they can't get inside the castle or whatever, and, like, Loki can just honk and honk and honk and honk the car's horn until somebody opens the door. That'd be really fun.
Or they could just do a very slight bit of conjuring, and they could actually be trying to deliver a pizza because they're in the car. I love that we're seeing all these ads for, I guess, Hyundai is the car, has a promotion with all the Marvel TV shows. So you have elements of both, WandaVision, Falcon and the Wooden Soldier, and this show all kind of appearing in their commercials now, which feels a little weird to me, but whatever. It's like, oh yeah, because Loki would drive a Hyundai. That makes perfect sense. Stupid. But I kept thinking, oh, they should have done a crossover. They should have done a promotion with Domino's or one of those things. Because it could have been a Domino's car. Anyway, there was one other thing I wanted to mention, and much like last week when I kind of lifted an idea from something I had read on the interwebs, and actually from, I think it was inverse.com, I had come across something else. I think it was, weirdly enough, and again, I'm not advocating this is like the best site for information, because there's 800 sites, and it just happens to be 2 articles in a row that I discovered there that I thought were interesting. There was something else interesting I discovered on inverse.com. I think it was late last week. And so I can't lie and try to pass this off as my own theory. So I'll give them credit where it's due. They had an interesting way of looking at the show at that point. And you're looking at a show with 6 episodes. And they were saying, hey, if you look at it a certain way, you've got these 6 episodes, and you can kind of make a parallel to the 6 Infinity Stones. And it's interesting because when you take it to there, you look at the color schemes, or what the predominant colors are that you find in each of the episodes, and it oddly sort of kind of works. Like episode 1, they think is like the Soul Stone. The entirety of the TVA is tinged with orange, which is the color of the Soul Stone. And, and also Loki happens to go through a checkpoint that would obliterate him if he didn't have a soul. And of course, he clearly does have one. Episode 2, it's the Reality Stone. And that's when Sylvia appears, and the lighting and everything, remember, it all shifted to a really weird and really unexplained red color, which is the color of the Reality Stone. And it's at that moment Loki is questioning his own reality, as well as what reality is Sylvie coming from. Episode 3, that's the one where, Loki and Sylvie are on Lamentus, but they're surrounded by purple tones, which is the color of the Power Stone. And this is the episode where Loki and Sylvie both discuss and display their various powers, and as well as they're coping with being powerless to the TVA and the apocalypse, whatever. Of all the episodes, that's the episode where their actual abilities or powers are talked about the most. And episode 4, which was last week, was, had a lot of gold tones going throughout it, which is analogous to the Mind Stone. And that's the episode where Mobius and Hunter B-15, they basically come face to face with the fact that there's been an elements of mind control and brainwashing that the TVA has put them and pretty much everyone through. And I was like, oh, that kind of sort of works. So if you, now it does become me, because it was only up to those 4 episodes. If you stick with that theory, obviously that leaves that there's 2 stones remaining. The Time Stone and the Space Stone. Now, one would assume, just based on what the thematic ideas are going on in the show, you would think they would be saying the Space Stone would be for the 5th episode, and they would save the Time Stone for the final episode. Now, the colors associated with those 2, Space Stone is blue and Time Stone is green, essentially. Now,
I think the Space Stone's purple and the Mind one's blue, but I could be wrong.
I'm gonna go out I'm gonna go out and assume that you're wrong until Jason messages me and says that you're right.
Oh no, it looks like it's blue in the movies, but it's purple in the comics.
They go. Yeah, I think they're going by the movies, not by the comics.
Okay.
So because it's the MCU. Now, in this episode that we just watched, I mean, there's a lot of green at the end of the episode, but I feel like that's really opening up to the next episode, and that's the huge, because throughout the episode before that, especially the exterior shots, but even inside the hatch, if you're really paying attention to the way, and I know you do when it comes to elements of like cinematography or whatever, everything is really shot with a very cold bluish tone to it. And,
right.
and of course, they were literally zapped across space to this void. So, okay, there's your Space Stone. So, I mean, again, does it really mean anything? Probably not. But I like to think it's kind of like those commercials on WandaVision. I just thought it was like maybe this somewhat subtle thing that they were using for the overall construction of the story.
I wouldn't think Marvel would be all about the next movie is going to be somebody trying to get the Infinity Gauntlet again, but it is with like kind of a cool thing to do,
Oh, yeah.
tied to the way Loki got killed or gets killed.
Right. Well, again, one of the amazing things about this series, and I think we talked about it several weeks ago, is you're talking about a franchise. I mean, the mega franchise of the MCU overall, and how much of that franchise was in some way devoted to finding these Infinity Stones, which would eventually lead to the big ultimate, Infinity War / Endgame, the whole thing. And then, oh yeah, they're just these things that are in a drawer somewhere here. They mean nothing. That might be the most not risk taking, but just like ballsy thing that they do in the whole series. Like, oh yeah, that thing we made a big deal about for like the last 10 years? Who cares?
I guess one thing that this episode made me think of too. I know I joked about it before, about Corey Stahl, but it does kind of make me think that there's always a chance that that they're setting up these more evil Avengers variant characters that maybe they can Corey Stoll is still alive and just he'll maybe king someone they're gonna set up a bad Avengers team, and Corey Stoll gets to be the evil Ant-Man type thing. And then that makes me wonder, is there a chance that Sylvie's going to end up joining King in the next episode or whatever, whoever the bad guy is? Because that would be that would be kind of a gut punch.
That is an interesting thought, especially as far as Sylvie is concerned, and I could see them going that way. It's interesting because with this series, I mean, again, WandaVision was a one and done. There's not going to be a season 2 of WandaVision. I hope Falcon and the Wooden Soldier is one and done because I never need to see that ever again. I think they're going to do a Captain America movie. Yeah, who cares?
Well, they're going to do a whole other season where they're fishing using that boat, and they just basically catch fish, deal with climate change and how it's affecting them. That'll be the message of that season.
You know what? And I'd probably end up liking that season better than this one. But Loki, I'm not really sure where Loki goes from here. But I like that I don't know. It's nice sometimes not to know.
Yeah, and I just like that it's making me, think of, even small things are making me think of like different concepts. Just like, oh, maybe Corey Stoll will end up being a Kang henchman. Like it all kind of adds up if you think about it. So interesting to see how if they're going to follow through this stuff, and if not, it's still a cool theory.
Oh, it's a great theory. I love it. I mean, if there's one thing I've always appreciated about you for the last 7 years, it's you usually come up with like some really nice theories. Either they turn out to be, wow, you were right on the nose, or well, you were out to lunch. But either way, I like them. So
and my vulgarity too. You like that a lot.
Well, yes. Now I'm the one cursing more often. But
yeah, it was funny because I decided to start listening to Bill Burr's podcast, and I just went back to like the earliest episode that was available on iTunes, and it was like from January 2011, and like 18 seconds into the episode he drops a C-bomb just because he wants to be like the first one to like say that like on a podcast that year, and I'm just like, oh, it's just like me. Except like
I was going to say, really? I'm pretty sure Ricky Gervais has used that word 100 times before you did, Mr. Burr. But anyway, if it's a C word, I think we're talking about.
Yeah, he just, yeah, it is. He just wanted to be the first one to say it in 2011.
Oh, okay, gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there? I feel. I think we've gone to the wall and to the max on this episode at this point. So
yeah, we covered it thoroughly. Yep.
Okay, so what I'll do now is, as I had said at the beginning, I'm going to give you guys my little reviews of a few things. I literally watched them each day of the weekend. So I'll run through them this way. Saturday I watched the movie that just recently premiered on HBO Max, as well as, I guess, theaters and some festivals. No Sudden Move. It's a film that was directed, shot, and edited by Steven Soderbergh. Look, Soderbergh is definitely one of the more interesting and risk-taking directors of the past 30 years. I mean, whether you want to go back to his early directorial efforts like Sex, Lies, and Videotape and Kafka. Man, I remember seeing Kafka in the theater. It was wild. Or maybe that really impressive and very varied run he had in the late 90s, early 2000s when he had like Out of Sight, The Limey, Aaron Brockovich, Traffic, and Ocean's 11. I mean, very different types of movies but all, very good in their own right. He's just a dude who's not ashamed to veer from small and quirky indie productions to really totally mainstream fare. But it's the fact that he can shift genres so neatly, from escapist comedies to heist films, intense character studies, you name it. I think that's the kind of thing that really makes him probably one of the more notable filmmakers of our generation. And, earlier this week, I was glancing over his IMDb page, and then I realized, oh my God, there's a lot of Soderbergh films I haven't seen. And I'm looking at the description of some of them. Some of them I have no interest in, but some of them I really want to check out. So it's kind of like a little mental assignment to myself for later this year. This movie, this latest one, the dude is hitting a sweet spot for me. Because No Sudden Move is a noir thriller. It's a crime story set several decades ago, which, that's the stuff that my dreams are made of. It's set in 1955 Detroit. It stars Don Cheadle and Benicio del Toro as Kurt Goins and Ronald Russo. They're a pair of gangsters, each of whom, let's just say they're each caught in their own little traps of desperation, but they are hired, along with a clearly more in the know Charlie, played by Kieran Culkin, by this deliberately shady character. I say deliberately because he's putting it on a bit, I think. The character's name is Doug Jones. He's played by Brendan Fraser. Dude, Fraser is enjoying a really nice second wind to his career, but he's totally embracing the world of character acting. He's embracing the fact he put on a tremendous amount of weight, I think, for a different role he's going to be in, but he totally uses it in this film because he's a big boy now. Anyway.
Nice.
To sum up the plot really quickly, they're hired for a job. The job is essentially to keep an eye and their guns trained on an accountant's family. And that accountant, by the way, is David Harbour. Y'all would know him from Stranger Things. His wife is actually played by the wonderful Amy Seimetz. Anyway, two of these gangsters, they got to stick with the family while one of them has to accompany the accountant back to the guy's office to grab some coveted document that the guy's boss is keeping in a safe. That's the setup. Everything else kind of spins out from there. The plot really goes from pretty super simple to beautifully complicated. Just dancing on the edge of convoluted, but not quite getting to that point. You also get some top-notch roles filled by Ray Liotta as one aggrieved big deal gangster. Oh, and look, Bill Duke. He's another kind of pissed off headman gangster. But how can I possibly finish without mentioning John Hamm? Because John Hamm's in this too. That's right, John Hamm. There's a bunch of really good people in the cast. Beyond all the people I've already mentioned, there is actually someone else who shows up that I will not spoil because it is totally played as a surprise. And for my fellow Oz fans out there, and I know the ladies on the Geek Girl Soup podcast recently did a podcast all about Oz recently. Hopefully they are aware of the fact that this film actually has the very last role for the actor and performer Craig Mums Grant. He died shortly after filming his part for this. And he's not an old guy. He's like my age probably. He was a man that we all knew who watched our show as Poet on the HBO series. The film itself, it's hardly a secret that films like these, for the last 40 odd years, they all kind of sit in the shadow of Chinatown. And, you can kind of see how the DNA of that film has been sprinkled in all these period noir films ever since that one. I mean, everything.
Motherless Brooklyn was totally a Chinatown clone. So
yeah. In this one, from the overarching, because I didn't even mention some certain things about it, which make you go, oh, it's very Chinatownish. Yeah, because there's these often overarching and questionable big conspiracies, which are usually more of a commentary on either government, society, or industry at both that time and maybe saying something about the times we live in today, or the fact that this movie, they lean really, really heavily into riffing on some musical underscoring moments that sound at certain times maybe a little bit too much like Henry Mancini's classic charade score, but I don't mind because I love that score. But there are other musical cues that sound, oh my God, did you just lift that directly off the Chinatown soundtrack? That sounds just like music from Chinatown. Again, not that there's anything wrong with that, because if you're going to borrow or steal, do it from the best. But lastly, beyond the great feel, the sound, the look of it all, and the way Soderbergh handles the cinematography, he clearly loves the fisheye lens. The movie really comes down to the great performances of both Cheadle and Del Toro. I get so used to seeing Cheadle in ensemble pieces, I forget how much the dude can really pull off being a leading man as good as anyone, or well as anyone in Hollywood. And look, Del Toro, he's just so much damn fun. It's just that he's just, again, it takes me back to some of his earlier roles where I remember smiling whenever I'd see Del Toro's name was in the cast, because I was like, oh, it's going to be fun. Go back to like the days of Usual Suspects and things like that. Lastly, because just to relate to I'm sorry.
And plus they're both MCU character actors, so they're relevant to this podcast.
Yes. Right. I actually had that thought. I also had the thought because you had, that in many ways, what they accomplish in this movie, they actually they might do a better job in just a couple hours than what season 4 of Fargo took 11 episodes to do. And mind you, I like season 4 of Fargo, but yeah. I might have liked this better. Anyway, it's very worth checking out. I know that my review is a little bit longer than I intended it to be, but the other two will be really short, so trust me. But yeah, you should definitely watch this when you get a chance.
Sweet.
Definitely in your wheelhouse, I think. On Sunday, I watched all 10 episodes of the series Hacks, which was essentially written and created by a number of people who had previously worked on Broad City. So then you know that the focal characters in this series are, both women, with a couple of generations of time and life separating them. But this series is probably going to do a good job of handling these type of storylines and these type of characters because of what the backgrounds of the creators and writers turned out to be. Look, it's all about, to me, more than anything else, this is about Jean Smart, who has been proving time and time again, at this point in her career, she can do no wrong. Good Lord. Huh. She's Deborah Vance. She's a Las Vegas legend. She's basically Joan Rivers by any other name, is who she is, really. And this actress who I had not ever seen before, her name is Hannah Einbinder. I'm probably mispronouncing her name. She won't hear this. Who cares? She plays the character Ava Daniels. She's basically a 20-something comedy writer that no one in Hollywood wants to touch at this point in her career because she got brought down by a Twitter scandal, essentially. But due to the machinations of their mutual agent, Deborah hires Ava to help freshen up her material, and basically the show kind of spins from how these two form a rather turbulent, if not at times toxic, mentorship, relationship, whatever you want to call it. It's a very good show. It's a damn good show. The show does not shy away from making Ava not the most necessarily likable or sympathetic character at times. She can be the most insufferable, entitled Gen Zer you're ever likely to see. And I like that they keep her that way. They don't kind of soften up her edges to make, oh, she's like us. No. Because you can have the moments where you're like, ugh, but other times you will feel tremendous empathy for her and understanding for her. And Jane Smart, we've talked about her on this podcast. You and I have talked about her in the past as well. Good Lord. I mean, from when we talked about her way back when, about season 2 of Fargo and on Legion, and then once he got past that, she was on what she did on Watchmen. She's a depression kitty on Big Mouth, which is an amazing little character.
Yeah, and she's in several episodes of Frasier, season 8.
She is. I knew it. I knew you were going to mention Frasier. And of course, this year, a lot of people are, giving their love to Jean Smart because of her appearances on Mayor of Easttown, which, a fairly minor role compared to this. She's on a roll. And good Lord, if she, I don't know who could or should beat her for a lead Emmy for this series. She's really that good.
She's just great in everything. I mean, I think the first time I saw her was on 24. And I mean, her and what's his name were just awesome that season.
Yeah.
So,
24 is what I believe kind of changed the paradigm for her. Because before that, she was a sitcom actress from the 80s, Designing Women, which was, very lauded show. And she kind of, she bounced, but she did other things between that. But 24 kind of put her on the map as she can do this. She can do drama. She can do this. Because she was one of the best things about 24 at that point in time, I thought. And then, then what she's done in the last several years has been amazing. And finally, because I want to finish up to get to the last thing, but this is also for you specifically, Dan, because I know you haven't seen it yet. But I know you, like many of our listeners, you're a fan of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Huh. Oh, yeah.
So it should be pointed out that Caitlin Olsen appears in about half the episodes as not Melissa Rivers, but she does play Deborah's daughter, DJ. Oh, by the way, of course, DJ stands for Deborah Jr. And I also noticed that one of the many production companies that appears at the end of the show is one of the production companies behind It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I did happen to notice that. And finally, this won't be super quick because I know we're running short on time. Finally, on Monday, because, that was Saturday, that was Sunday, Monday, July 4th weekend. So I watched the 6-episode sketch comedy series, That Damn Michael Che. These are all on HBO Max, by the way. That one, look, some folks might take issue with Che at times for stuff he's said or drops in the occasional interview or on social media. I have to admit I kind of like him, obviously, because I watched the damn show. If I didn't like him, I wouldn't watch the show. He's pretty much, he's won me over with his chemistry with Colin Jost on the SNL Weekend Update segment. That's really kind of like the only thing I look forward to watching on SNL, unless they have an amazing guest host or something. It's just the Weekend Update segment. With this series, he's clearly, definitely channeling and been inspired by his friend Dave Chappelle, because they're using a sketch comedy series to really, do a deep dive on issues of race and society, really about a black person perspective on everything. Either be the police brutality or an episode which is all about the COVID-19 vaccine, actually. The only difference is that, unlike Dave Chappelle, Che can really only be Che. He doesn't play other characters the way Chappelle did. So he kind of leaves it to a solid troupe of comedic actors to kind of flesh out all the different sketches that they all help to illustrate whatever the common theme of that episode might be. Basically, it's definitely a funny series. Every once in a while, it might be a little shocking, but in a good way. Because it's shocking in a way that has you nodding your head in agreement along with it. The episodes zip right by. They're like, oh, that's a 19-minute episode, or it's a 22-minute episode. Bing, bang, boom. But they zip by, but they still will leave a lasting impression on you at times as well. So I do think it's definitely a worthwhile watch. So I think y'all should check that one out too. And that is my trifecta of HBO Max shows. Yeah, it didn't take that long. There you go.
Nice.
All right. So if you enjoyed this podcast, you will really enjoy hanging out on our Facebook page. That page is the Serious TV Drama Podcast page. Like the page to join the conversation about shows like all the ones we just mentioned and so many more. You can find us or our podcast. You can pretty much find us where most people find podcasts. You name it. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, blah, blah, blah. We're almost everywhere. And someday by the way, I just thought of this now. There may be an Instagram account coming for this podcast sooner than later, and maybe that might drum up 1 or 2 more listeners for us. I don't know. I'm thinking about it.
I'll get you some unsolicited medical advice because you'll, be posting pictures of whatever manner of crippling you've done to yourself.
No, I'll just post pictures of all my X-rays from the past year. Here's my toe. Here's my pelvis. And of course, you can find all 300, and I believe we're at 317 now. All 317 of our podcasts can be found at stvdpodcast.podbean.com. And finally, follow us on Twitter. Please, somebody follow us on Twitter. Our handle there is at STVD Podcast. That's STVD as in Serious TV Drama. We will be back next week. I know it'll still be your vacation, but you will hopefully be able to take the time to talk about the finale of Lost. Lost. Yeah. Wow. Loki. Wow. Did Karen Morrow take over the podcast?
Yeah. I think, you and Jamie already talked about the finale of Lost, so we don't have to cover that, unless you want my take on it.
No, I don't. I know your take. No, we will be back to talk about the finale of Loki, and most likely at the end of that podcast, beyond if I decide to do another review of something, I probably will since I've done it for the first 5 of these, presumably, I will, or I should say we will, or whatever, have some sort of announcements how we're going to be handling that Breaking Bad rewatch that we want to do for the rest of the year. I'm actually been having a huge change of heart about how I wanted to approach it. So I think I think you might be more, happy about where I'm starting to lean on it. I just got to figure out some things with the calendar and see if it makes sense.
Oh. My plan of doing 1 episode a day for 2 straight months that each have 31 days is a really nice plan. So July and August, we do this.
There you go. Oh, ow, my ribs. Anyway.
God, we'll be so sick of each other after 62 straight days of podcasting.
Oh, do you remember there was that time? Was it when we were doing all the Mad Men big season ones where it seemed like over the course of like a month we were doing.
Yeah, we did like.
We were doing that plus some other ones. It was just the amount of time we were spending with each other on things.
Yeah, I think we did like 5 in 1 week once or something, or at least it's close to that. It was just crazy. We just kept going.
Oh, well, that was one of those years when all of a sudden our numbers of how many podcasts we put out were like insane. It was like, wait a minute, how is that possible? Because we averaged more than a podcast a week for this year. It was something like 70 or 80.
Well, yeah, whatever year that was, our asses were definitely single because there was no way we were pulling that shit off. Other than that.
Well, that was after I broke up with. Anyway, so with all that said, Dan, thank you for taking time out of your vacay to talk about Loki. I hope the kids are still frolicking in the pool and not, tapping their feet waiting for their dinner right now.
Yeah, they're still down there, so they must be having a good time.
There you go. And thank you all for listening as well. So good night to you and good night to all you people out there.
Good night.